It was the 22nd of November, a little bit after uploading my second Karma video, that I was having a discussion in Hoonti's Discord about maps. After explaining why Det HQ is the antithesis of fun, the conversation turned to making a new map and blah blah blah. You already know where this is going because I made a map, which came out about a month later, on the 24th of December. I'd like to discuss the thought process I went through to get this map done, and to keep this video short, I've decided to make a separate video later explaining how you can make a map yourself. I'll link that one in the description and comments, but for now though, let's start with day one of me making Archipelago. So it started off with a concept. I bounced ideas off this random fellow in the Discord, such as maybe using a Japanese theme, or maybe a Greek one. I took some concepts from other media I liked, and eventually we settled on the idea of an oceanside cliff-themed map, with buildings hanging onto the edge for dear life. The island itself would be tropical, a la Far Cry or Crysis, and I stated quite specifically from the start that I didn't want many underground elements, as I found many of Traitor Town maps can be summed up as dark, dirty corridors. Hell, even 67th Way takes place mostly in the underground, despite that only being like 10% of the map. Once I had an idea done, I drew a concept art. If you ignore the fact that this looks like a weird turd, you may realize it looks awfully a lot like Vista Overpass. And yeah, it does. So now the concept was finished. All I had to do was build the thing. The first thing I needed to figure out was how to playtest my map. Because even though I hadn't made any of it yet, I wanted to make sure that I had a way of testing how the map works in-game so that I know how it plays. I don't want to have to build an entire map only to realize that it's out of proportion. So I asked Hoonti and he explained the process and I managed to get it to work. The first thing I did was create a basic height chart, because I wanted to test fall damage, as fall damage got changed a while ago, because a lot of noobs kept complaining about it. I playtested it for a while and created this little shack as a sort of placeholder to try and get a feel for how big each room should be in the map. Once that was done, I needed to start work, and the first thing I did was fall asleep for 3 days because I don't remember what I did. When I came back though, I decided to work on the first third of the map. Before I got round to actually starting my map proper, the thoughts on what I wanted the map to look like evolved, and I came up with the idea to have the map be a giant circle with buildings surrounding it. I wanted there to be some elevation to each side of the map, and I wanted a layered building with staircases leading up to a higher cliff face that leads you further around this island donut. So I got to work, creating what I would eventually call Villa. The first part I wanted to have was a little alcove of sorts, for some beach chairs and a balcony overlooking it, and once that was done, I expanded from there, creating each room bit by bit, tweaking any discrepancies till eventually I got this. There were some features of this layout I liked, such as this MC Escher-esque room, or how it was stacked to look like a cake. Now that that was done, I started a match in my private server and sent the link to a bunch of discords to try and get people to playtest. And that's where a problem became immediately apparent. Two problems, in fact. The first one being, the entire mansion was just too big. Big as in each room was a few studs too tall and wide, as if I grabbed the whole thing and grew it by several studs. This meant that traversing Villa became arduous and slow. Moving from one room to another to track down a killer was a complete slog. And the second problem? If you're on a lower floor and something happened on roof, you had to walk all the way to this one specific staircase to go investigate the issue. By the time you'd done that, the traitor could have just jumped off the roof and disappeared. And that's not to mention the fact that there's this wall in the way, so even if you did manage to get up there, it takes even longer just to get to the area where the traitor might be. The reason why I put this wall here was because if I removed this entire room, the roof just felt like a giant, completely flat open space. But now that I did put this room here, people used it to try get on top using prop boosting, which gave them an unfair advantage. But I didn't want to build a staircase up there, because it just meant more places for the player to have to think about. I tried adding this sand mesh on top and retextured it to look like tarpaulin to maybe make them more obvious, but if anything, it just gave them more cover. So back to the drawing board. I had spent an entire day creating a piece of crap. So the next day, I came back on and redid the entire thing. I built every room again, but a few studs smaller, making elements like doorways and windows thinner and shorter. I removed rooms that I felt were redundant, like this flanking corridor that was for some reason fine in studio but looks pitch black in game. And I scaled back the roof, so instead of a 3 to 4 story monster, it was now only 2 and a bit stories. I realized that the only way I could fill the empty space on the roof was by scaling back the roof so much that it wasn't that empty to begin with. This also meant it had the advantage of being easier to spot anything going on roof, because people on the lower levels have a chance to deal with engagements from above. Some elements had to be reworked. This sort of balcony looking into the main living room was now exposed to the air, but I wanted to keep it as I felt that without it, the living room felt like an open dungeon that nobody would want to go to. Having fights from the first and second floor and finding ways to outflank your opponent was a joy, so I've decided to keep this open space. I also had this little jump placed here that I jokingly called Jato parkour, as my speedrunner mates love to try and get me to play that game for some reason. I enjoy having parkour spots and maps, like the roof on Santa Fe, that require a little bit of skill and timing to get, as it rewards people who know the maps better in interesting ways. So I deliberately kept this jump, but moved it over to here instead, making it slightly easier so it was actually viable. You may have also noticed these ledges on the sides of each floor. That was intentional, as the only part of Det HQ I like is walking along this trim, evading people and dropping down behind them. I wanted to let people do that here too, so if you couldn't do this parkour for example, you could just go the easy way and jump through this window instead. Keeping in mind though that doing so requires you to face diagonally, and it also means that your arm can be exposed through the wall. Once I made all these changes to Villa, I playtested it again and the change did wonders to the gameplay. It no longer felt like roof was an overpowered spot to engage from, and the whole thing didn't feel like such a slog to traverse, as it was much smaller. And because I scaled back the roof, the whole map felt a lot lighter because a lot more of it was exposed to the sun. Now that I had finished Villa, after 2 days of progress, it was on to the next part of the map. So up to this point, I was just using a placeholder for the mountain, but my next area would be heavily dependent on the actual terrain itself. So I quickly learned how to use terrain before I started on the next area. I started to add terrain to the mountain by keeping it simple at first, just using really tall cylinders to make the basic shape. I'd add further detail like caves and cliffs and whatnot later on once the buildings were in place. I realized that as I was making this cliff face, some of the terrain blocked this window off completely, so sadly I had to scrap it. A wall has been kept where it once was because I really liked this window for some reason. Cliffside was going to be the most distinctive looking part of the map. It was the part that I had originally thought of when coming up with this map, and hopefully adding it would make this map stop looking a bit like Hurapan or Vista Overpass. My favourite map in the game is Compound, and that's mainly because there's so much fun parkour and tricks you can get up to, which give you an edge in combat. The amount of times I've outsmarted my opponent using just my map knowledge on Compound and outflanking them from above is why I love it, and I wanted to give people that same feeling with this map, hence why Villa was designed the way it was. Cliffside was going to be an even bigger extension of that concept, and so with that in mind, I started building. This elevator here was originally going to be an elevated area people could access, but I couldn't think of a way to make it look distinct, and then I thought about the context of this island. How do the inhabitants get up to this island, anyways? And what kind of people are those inhabitants? This is when I settled on the final concept for this map, an island in the Caribbean archipelago, full of modern-day pirates or gun merchants or other unruly types who, for one reason or another, need a place to stay away from all the prying eyes of civilization. And to get up to the island, they would have to use an elevator, which leads all the way down to the water's surface, with a small dock from which they parked their boats. This wooden walkway was a must, by the way. For whatever reason, I love the feeling of dangerous verticality that comes from long wooden bridges over deadly drops. By the end of the third day, I had finished half of this part of the map, and was quite proud with how it was looking. The main reason why Villa took only 1 day to make, well, technically 2 if you count the rework, because it was just one simple contained building. But since I had started adding terrain, that ended up taking quite a lot of time, so I could only finish half of the actual buildings of Cliffside, despite the fact that they were relatively simple compared to Villa. So on the next day, I finished the second half of Cliffside, which was mainly just this giant room. Compared to the other parts though, it definitely feels rather large and uninspired, but my main reasoning is that this would be some sort of power generator room, which houses the winch from which the elevator is suspended from. The day afterwards I would finish up some of the decor, including the elevator carried counterweight, the supports, and the actual winch itself. Now that I think about it, I probably should have realized that this would make people wonder if the elevator actually works, as I've been asked that question almost 100 times by now. Unlike Terminal, no, the elevator does not work. It would just end up being a buggy gimmick that would only serve to help stall out the round. This is also the main reason why I've decided to have no tester or tea room, as I feel like they just help the traitors or innocents camp, and it forces the opposing team to have to focus on particular parts of the map. It's the main reason why I hate Det HQ so much. Every round I have to go to tester early on if I'm T, otherwise I'll find myself at a huge disadvantage. I don't want people only playing in one part of the map, and so for that reason I've decided to do the opposite of what every new TT map seems to be doing, and have zero gimmicks, aside from the basic design of the map itself. Hopefully this means players will actually explore the map to its fullest, and fights will happen all over it, instead of just in one room, like 67th Way's basement. Now that Cliffside was done, I playtested again, this time placing invisible walls and moving all spawns so Villa was completely blocked off, as I didn't have enough players to fill both parts of the map at once. Since I had learned from my mistake with Villa, this time I didn't need to rebuild the whole thing, as it was already to scale with the TT character model from the get-go. I did learn, however, that it felt confusing to track where the enemy was at times, as sound effects from above or below can sound the same, so I simplified the layout by removing the floor in these two buildings so that they both were one room alone. Out of the two areas, Cliffside definitely looked a lot cooler than Villa. It was at this point that the style of the map was really starting to take shape. However, the last part would prove to be a bit of a challenge. This was the part of the map I was most unsure about. Cliffside was planned from the start, and Villa seemed like a natural extension of my idea to have the map be circular, but I wasn't entirely sure what to put in this last area until I started building. The only idea I had at the time was that I wanted to use some kind of mosaic tile floor of sorts, maybe a large open area surrounded by buildings with the tiling in the middle. The original idea for this was going to be called Plaza. I decided to start by adding this staircase to the side of Winch Room, as well as connecting this upper area to a cave entrance. Earlier, I had mentioned that I wanted this map to mostly take place outside, but I realized it was hard to get from one side of the map to the other quickly, so once I finished Villa, I had two caves put in place. The first one behind the beach chairs, as I realized there was no reason to jump down there, and the second cave would be on this lower path here, leading up to just past Cliffside, above Winch Room. The beginning of Hotel was literally just me placing two giant blocks, one 45 degrees off the other. Since I wasn't entirely sure what to do here, I just decided to slap this weird angle on and try work around that. As the way I work is by starting off with one room of something, or just a basic shape, and carving that into an actual space, changing anything later on down the line. I find it too difficult to see into the future and know exactly what would make for a fun map. So I just take it a step at a time and try to find ways to simplify or change it later, as you can never really know what a good design is until you actually try it out and find the flaws. Had I actually spent more time planning out each area, it would have probably taken considerably longer to make, and I don't even think it would be even better than what it is right now. With this new design, I decided to change the name of Plaza to Hotel. I would keep the mosaic tile idea, but at least I had come up with something concrete to surround it with. It was at this moment that I realized that I had no idea how to fill this gap between Hotel and Villa, so I just decided to up and remove it. I was going to put a forest and waterfall here or something, like how Old Monsoon used to look, but that would have been kind of boring and would have probably taken a lot of work to make look good, so I just took the lazy approach. Instead, the way to Hotel from Villa would be the cave I had originally placed way back before I even started Cliffside. This cave would lead from the deck chairs into one of the rooms of Hotel. Now, the building was originally 4 stories tall, but learning from my time on working on Villa, I tweaked the terrain and made it shorter by 3 stories. I also decided that I didn't want to turn this into a labyrinth of rooms like a real hotel, so I stripped back many of the rooms and created this sort of tiered staircase layout, which gave me an excuse to not have to make a bunch of really large rooms. Early on in this map's progress, I wanted to use this old gate model, as it was used on Barn and 67th Way, but that has since been removed. I remember fondly the day I realized you could open these gates years ago, as I always thought they were just a wall, so not having new players be able to experience that feels like a shame, so I decided to reuse these assets as a memory of what Barn used to be, though I'm glad Barn is gone. Once the layout was done, I had to figure out what to put in each room. The one connecting to the cave would be some kind of storage room, and the one connecting to the cliffside could be a kitchen, and the other 2 actual bedrooms. I realize now that there are only 4 beds in this entire hotel, but let's just say that this island doesn't have many people living on it. But I'm willing to bet not many people want to stay on a pirate-infested island in the first place. Once hotel was done, I decided to playtest as I usually do, and found nothing really wrong with the hotel, so I made no changes besides starting to add decor to the kitchen, as well as creating these chandelier models. By this point, the map was structurally finished, as in all I had to do now was just add more decorations. Someone suggested I add a waterfall early on, so I decided to put one here between Villa and Cliffside, which gave me an idea for what to put on top of the island, as originally I had no idea what to do before. Having a string of small lakes and waterfalls definitely looks a lot better than whatever the hell I had planned beforehand. Earlier I mentioned that I didn't want to use tea rooms, and I didn't bring up tea traps because I feel like they're a bit different. If done well, I think they can be an interesting part of gameplay, but most of the time they seem to fall into two categories. Either they become extremely annoying to have to deal with as an innocent, or they become so inconsequential that the traders never seem to get any use out of them. So I decided not to add any, because I couldn't think of any good spots to put them in. People suggested elevator should be a T-trap, but I feel like nobody would ever use it except for certain edge cases. You may have noticed by now that the leaves and the trees have no collision. This was a deliberate choice because I didn't want it to be impossible to shoot people in the trees if they prop boosted up there. This seems to have caught a ton of people off guard, which has led to some pretty hilarious deaths. I also made all the trees curved enough that you can probably climb all of them normally anyways. I knew some people would complain if they couldn't climb the trees, so I made sure that all of them weren't OP to get into. As for the top of the mountain, or for all the other islands that I added as a suggestion by Hunti, people have asked several times if they could get over to these places, and the answer is no. My main reason being, people would just camp up there and snipe down, or shoot at people from the other islands. Whilst the ceiling and kill brick I've placed on top of the map has thwarted all attempts I've seen of people attempting to prop boost up there, there have been people who've managed to get to the outer islands either by map change or some other mystery bug that they refuse to tell me about. Which is weird, because the roof of the map doesn't actually extend far enough to allow them to still be alive. Now, I could design around the other islands, but that would require me reworking the rest of the entire map to ensure that it isn't unbalanced, and the map is large enough as is already. As of writing this script, it's been a bit of time since the map has released, and I've managed to gain some valuable insight that wasn't originally apparent in my original tests before release. The current opinion seems to be rather mixed, with people either saying they love it, or saying it's the worst thing they've ever played. But some of the most concerning gripes seem to be either it's too confusing or too large. I chalk up the confusing aspect to the fact that it's barely been out for a week by this point, but the size problem has been readily apparent to me in the rounds I've played. There seems to be two core problems with the map so far, the first being that it's way too open, and that it's too large. The open problem means large patches of area just has these disgusting sightlines and zero cover. These are mostly the roof of hotel, villa, and even this part of cliffside. This means that if a large group of people, usually including the dead, gathers around in these areas, it's almost impossible for the traitor to counter without being spotted, as there's really only two spots that they can come from due to the circular nature of the map. This seems to be a problem that isn't inherent in all of the other maps, which sort of go for a bowl design rather than a mountain design. I think this is a problem, mainly because the only effective way to deal with these situations are by using C4, and ignoring the fact that some of these spots are so large that sometimes C4 can't even kill everyone there. I don't want to have to force people to rely on C4 wastelands, so it would be lazy of me to not try and fix this problem, as I'd rather have people try any playstyle they feel necessary to deal with the situation at hand, and not have to hope that they happen to have credits ready to spend. The second problem with the map is the size, or more accurately, how long the rounds go for. I've always hated long rounds in the game. I've always wished that Hunti would lower the max round time from 6 minutes to 5, as no 6-minute round I've ever been in was hosted by traders who knew what the fuck they were doing. It seems that due to how far apart my map is, and the circular nature of it, the end of rounds becomes a several minute long wild goose chase, with the last two people trying to find each other. I believe that one quote-unquote easy way to fix this would be to move everything closer together, as in physically move these 3 areas close enough that you can easily hear from one side of the map to the other. This should help people pinpoint where people are through the walls to some degree, but it would also reduce the travel time from one part of the map to the other. The reason why it took me this long to even notice these issues is probably because I tested each area in isolation and found no issues with each of them individually. And even when I did test the map as a whole, I didn't really have a large enough player base, or even played long enough to even realize these issues. I probably should have seen it sooner, as the areas between each building are quite literally afterthoughts. One other thing I could do to fix this issue is by changing the caves, either by making them more exposed, connecting them to other points, or even having them link together. Though I worry that if I make them both link up, that people will just stick to the cave, as it will have relatively good cover and only a few spots to get attacked from. This would end up being a nightmare for the traders to take if a good player camps there, I really want to rework Winch Room, and my main reasoning is that people going through Cliffside only seem to take the above path, which is super exposed, yet the obvious fast choice to take. I want people to take these lower paths, mainly because I think they look better, and I originally intended for people to have to traverse this way. Much people have just defaulted to going through here and taking the ladder and winch room up to the top of Hotel, which is also super exposed and kind of a nasty spot to camp from, as it gives you a quick access to Cliffside, Cave, and all of Hotel if you jump down through the windows. Hell, you can even snipe people from Villa from here, which is something that I don't exactly want to remove, but with all of these other advantages that Hotel Roof have, it just kind of feels like overkill at that point. As such, my plan for the next map progress video will be to do a few things. Firstly, strip back a ton of the terrain to move all of the buildings physically closer together. Then I want to make it so that the roof of Hotel Villa and even this part of Cliffside inaccessible. Removing winch ladder and reworking the cave system so it leads into winch room might force people to actually play inside the buildings themselves. The last change I can think of is to move this water-filled cave to a more exposed spot. As of now, my current opinion of my map is a 6 out of 10. It has some flaws that make the game less fun to play, and whilst my focus was on making this map pretty, but if I have to sacrifice some decor to make this map play better, then I will.
Alright, so basically how we're going to start this is just meet me at the skull. Alright, so the first step, you got to get the skull out of the case, and to do that, you just press E on this book. You'll know it's the right book because it sounds like glass. That one, yeah, that one. Press E. See? Now it's open.
Okay.
Now what you do is you bring this, and you basically just keep trying to feed it to this thing until it actually eats it. There we go.
Okay.
And then you go down here, and then you press this button until it says don't do this. And then the next step, we have to go get the red key card from the bottom of the elevator. Alright. Take that, set it to the bottom of the pool. Because you know that blue light in the pool down there?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to turn red and you have to click E on it. The problem is, it doesn't stay red forever.
Okay, so I press this, I guess, and then I teleport.
Yes, press the spam E on it. Yes, spam E on it so you make sure you actually press it. Now teleport back, and if you did it right, the button is red, and you press E on the button.
Dude!
Yep, there you are. I see you.
Dude. What is this eye? Oh.
Oh yeah, there's a giant eye. I don't know. By the way, you're gonna die now.
Wait, what? Oh. Oh. Ah!
I'd like to return to the
okay.
classics.